Hello and welcome. My name is Michelle Glover DaCosta, and I will be taking you through inLab Software 22 designs for complete over natural dentition dentures. In the opening screen, you have the option in the order management to either add new order or add new case. Add new order adds in a brand new patient file, whereas add new case adds an existing patient another case to their profile. So in this particular case, I've selected add new case. We're now in the administration screen, so here you will see where we're able to identify our prescription. So I select dentures, where I have the option for denture teeth or individual teeth. So individual teeth, once I select it, you'll see that I can highlight just one arch here, and I've highlighted my upper arch in question. Now, you'll notice that on the arch itself, it has almost like bridge icons between the teeth themselves. That basically tells the software that they are connected, so all those teeth are splinted together. As soon as you give one of them a click with your left cursor, it'll now become a circle. That is basically the software's way of now addressing that there are tooth segments. So there's a clear separation right now between my anteriors and posteriors. So you can do sections, you can do all one arch, or you can individualize them all to be like denture teeth if you wanted. Now the system defaults to designing what's known as biogeneric. So that's where you can make the teeth look like other tooth manufacturers, or you can make the teeth mimic the patient's current set of teeth. But you also do now have the option to add in either digital genios or digital portrait teeth, where you would now be able to 3D print or mill the portrait or genios lines. So it'll be the same lines that you're familiar with. Now I chose the square ovoid shape here. And I have what's known as automatically detect. So the software is automatically going to put in a mold that it thinks is best, based on, the patient's arch and things like that. You can, of course, choose one to begin with if you'd like, and then just change it if you need to at the design phase. So nothing that you choose here you're set with. You can always go back and change should you need to. And then you need to fill in the details for what you're going to manufacture the teeth and the base out of. Even if you do plan to 3D print these, not a problem. You absolutely are able to just identify a general material name at this point. And you can also identify, like you're seeing me do here, add in a try-in file so that the software knows that at the end there will also be a monolithic try-in fabricated for exporting as an STL for 3D printing. Once we move into the scan step, again, if you're connected to the Ineos X5 scanner, this is where you are able to scan and identify either a model or a impression that you're scanning. However, in this particular case, I'm going to import STLs. So again, you can import STLs from a third-party system should you need to. So I'm selecting my upper jaw at this point in time first because that's what's highlighted under my object list. And then I'll basically do the same with the lower jaw and the bite rim. So for the lower jaw, I'm now importing my natural dentition for the opposing arch here. So again, I'm just finding my opposing scan, which I actually took with the prime scan, and I'm now importing each one of these scans individually. So for my bite registration, what's kind of neat is I actually used what's known as a reference denture workflow. So I have the patient's existing denture here, and I've now scanned that, and I'm importing that physically into the system, which is going to give me some really valuable information in terms of midline, the shape of the teeth, and even the occlusal plane. So it's kind of a nice way to be able to, complete the design of this new denture when you have an existing denture to kind of reference for the patient's, either bite or even the aesthetics of the case as well too. So once you have your 3 scans imported, and again, if you have multiple scans, you can also import more just by adding more objects to the list. However, this is sufficient for this particular case of mine here. So now I'm able to import each one of those files. So the software is generating the models at this point in time so that I'm able to continue with my design. So the very first step of the model phase is going to allow me to edit the model. So exactly as the name would suggest, I can make any changes should I need to. So on the left-hand side, you can see right now my lower jaw is highlighted. Okay, so let's say I want to fill in that little hole there. I can use something like the replace tool. And basically with my left cursor, I double click to start, single click to tag down and wrap around that hole. So I always want to be just outside of where the hole actually starts. And then it's a double click to finish. As soon as I hit apply there on the right hand side, it's going to actually fill in that little hole for me to make it a complete tooth there. So now for the upper jaw here is of course my edentulous arch. So let's say there's a little bit of an air bubble on my model prior to me scanning with my prime scan. Not a problem. At this point in time, I can double click to start, wrap around that little bubble there, and basically hit apply again. And the software looks at its surroundings to give the best fit solution in terms of where the material should finish. So at this point in time now, if I'm happy with where my model is now sitting. With my check occlusion step, I can actually now see the patient's bite based on my vertical dimension scan that I took on my prime scan. Okay, so the patient's in articulation here, and I can actually now physically see that the software has stitched everything, both on the prime scan side of things and now the inLab side as well too. So the next step here, set model axis. If you're familiar with software 20, this is a really important step to line up things like your midline and occlusal plane. So you want to first get your arches into the horseshoes kind of on the right-hand side, so you can physically pick them up and move them with your right cursor. I always recommend picking up your upper jaw first, because of course your lower is in articulation, but because our upper is our stationary jaw, it means it will definitely bode better to pick up your upper jaw. And basically you want to get the midline into position from the bird's eye view, but also be looking at the upper left-hand side to see the facial aspect of the midline. And then of course with your right cursor you can physically pick that up, and your left will help tilt it or rotate it to allow you to line up your occlusal plane and your midline further. Now that line on the lower left is in the front. That is actually the facial lip support line from a profile view, and then a bird's eye view is on the right hand side. So again, that will come in handy when we move into the next steps shortly here, where it's known as model analysis, and we're able to edit the facial lip support line, which I'll get into in just a moment. So here under the denture baseline step, the software has proposed for us the border of where the denture baseline should finish. However, as you can see here, it's not ideal. So at this point in time, you can choose to either edit the line of where the software has proposed it with either the edit line or drag line option, or you can also choose to completely delete it and just start from scratch yourself. So with the drag line option, exactly as you see me doing here, you can hold your right cursor and move your mouse up or down to grab more surface area, and then you just drag with your left cursor into the position that you want. So that does work to a degree, but again, sometimes when the software has kind of really fallen off the mark in terms of where the border should sit, I find it's just easier to start from scratch. And again, as the clinician or the operator, we know best, obviously, where the denture line should finish. So sometimes it's easier just to do that ourselves at this point in time. So I'm just going to go around. It's single clicks with my left cursor to basically tag down that line, but it's always a double click to start. But with the single clicks, what I'm able to do is kind of curve around frenums and things like that. So it's just now single clicks, and then I want to hold my left cursor if I want to rotate my model at the same time, because the tool is activated already, which will allow me to rotate to a better position for a better view. So then at this point in time, I'm just single clicking again with my left cursor. And then when I get to my starting point, I will double click to finish, and that will attach the line together. Now, once you do have your initial proposal, you are able to, of course, still edit the line. And then just as well, just note for yourself that if you ever got to the point where you're designing the actual denture in the design phase, and you at that point want to change something with the baseline, you can always go back to this step and quickly edit the baseline of where your denture is finishing. You do have the functionality to go back should you need to. So when you get to your starting point, you double click to finish, and now everything is connected. Perfect. So it's all connected here. So when we get to, kind of look more in depth here, sometimes it's easier once you have it initially connected with each other to just go back and adjust where needed. So that's what you just saw me doing here around the frenum. And then I move into the insertion axis and blockout step. So I'm telling the software in this next phase, kind of post-manufacturing, how is this inserted? So you want to be able to try to minimize and control those undercuts in the vestibular area where possible. Now you do have the option to block out, however, the software doesn't automatically block out. And the reason being is that obviously most of the time, you don't want to block out unless it's maybe an immediate denture. So if you did want to add material, you have the option to set a max wax thickness, where you can tell the software that as you're adding, don't go above, let's say 0.2 millimeters, whatever your preference might be. So that does come in handy for immediate dentures, but again, the software does not automatically block out those steps. So the final step here is model analysis. So what you were essentially doing here is identifying key landmarks on the actual patient's arch, both the upper and the lower. So the lower, although it's a natural dentition here, just key to have some key landmarks for the software to know, for setting up the bite and things like that. So when you have the help tool turned on the right-hand side, it'll give you not only a diagram and a description, but also the name of where it wants you to basically place these analysis points on the ridge itself. And then there's one additional step known as the edit labial limiting plane. So I'd mentioned in the set model axis step, we were looking at the facial lip support line on the profile view from the bottom left-hand screen. So this is where the software has now come up with the 5.8 millimeters here. So again, if you determined a specific number in your record taking appointment, you can plug that in, or you can even turn on your bite rim at that point. So when you move into the design step here, your first step is always the parameters. Okay, so you can preset parameters under the menu button where you can set parameters for materials that you're using, because of course every manufacturer is slightly different. But what's really nice is you can also set preferences based on your own preferences with your aesthetics for the denture, with things like the denture base. You know, how much festooning do you like in the vestibular region or the root variation? So you can set it to be, you know, really pronounced or a little bit more reserved. You can also identify with the upper if you want a smooth palette or kind of rugai. It defaults to kind of adapting to the rugai. However, if you do want a smooth one, you just have to check off that parameter. So the very first step after parameters is the adjust morphology step. So the software will plug in some teeth molds here, okay, based on the digital portrait library and the square ovoid shape. However, if at this point I wanted to change any of them, I absolutely could. Okay, so you have the ability to change the shape of the tooth, the mold of the tooth. So let's say you've selected genios or portrait, you can change the molds physically at this point in time. Or if you wanted to go and switch the tooth line from digital portrait or genios to even individual to design the teeth yourself, you have that functionality as well. But once in the positioning step, one thing that I often do is I select harmonic setting. Although that pushes the teeth back here, as you see, what it does is it nicely closes any gaps and it adapts the teeth to more the patient's kind of natural size. So at this point in time, I'm actually turning on my bite registration. I'm making it a little bit more translucent by just decreasing the value on the bottom tool there under display objects. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my shift key, highlight all my teeth, and then select linear. So what I'm doing is I'm locking all my teeth together. So I'm able to bring them forward and really kind of get them into the position that I want. Okay, so again, I'm using the patient's existing denture as a way to kind of know where my teeth should be positioned, which is just a nice added benefit of using the reference denture workflow with your prime scan. Okay, so I'm getting the teeth into position here physically, and again, linear is really important to have checked on when you're highlighting groups of teeth, so that what it does is it keeps all the teeth together, okay, and it locks them kind of in place so that whatever tooth you're hovering over with the tool where the arrows show up, it's not, you know, kind of doing that tooth a little bit more into a movement, it's moving them all fluidly with each other. So the linear tool, very important to have turned on. But the nice thing is that you are able to take just one tooth at a time. So of course you can just highlight one tooth in question by double clicking on that tooth or by highlighting it on the left hand side where you see all the teeth highlighted currently. Or you can choose to of course have them selected as groups of teeth like you see on the right hand side where it's upper anteriors, left posteriors, and right posteriors. So you have that functionality as well. But it's a really nice workflow to be able to quickly move the teeth by turning on that linear option. So once you're in the edit element stage, this step is specific to editing the teeth themselves. So here you can edit the contact, right? So if the contact is a little heavy in area, you can adjust the contacts. We can also add more surface texture to the facial aspect of the anterior teeth, which when you're 3D printing or milling the teeth is super key to be able to ensure that you're getting more, you know, anatomy details into them so that when you polish them and finish them, they do look a little bit more like a denture tooth or a natural tooth because of the extra texture that you put into it. It just helps light kind of reflect certain ways off the teeth to make it look less like a fake tooth. But at this point in time, if I turn on my contacts with the analyzing tools, I can see where the patient might be biting a little bit heavier. So I can use things like the move and rotate tool. So now if I want to just move individual teeth, I can. So if I want to flare out my teeth just a little bit more, I have that full functionality to do so. Okay, so again, you don't have to do all the positioning in the previous step. That's of course handy when you're moving groups of teeth, but if you're trying to position just kind of one individual tooth, I sometimes find that the edit element stage is better to do that when you're designing the teeth yourself, even if it is using an existing kind of mold like digital portrait or digital genio. So you can still control things like the length of the tooth, the size of the tooth, make it bigger to fit the space that you actually have, or make it even smaller if you want to as well too. Now, once I have a posterior tooth highlighted, I can select the Adjust Contact tool, and I can automatically highlight certain teeth on the right-hand side or by clicking on that tooth. And you can see here I'm automatically adjusting the occlusion on that 2-4. Okay, so based on my parameters that I have for my teeth, it removed material based on that. But it's a really quick way to do it. Now, you'll notice that it doesn't do that for the anteriors, and the reason being is that it doesn't want to take away too much material where it might matter. So it wants you to do that manually yourself. But again, the posteriors, you can automatically adjust them. But with the anteriors, it just wants a little bit more TLC. So with things like the form tool or the shape tool, so you'll see here I turn on the shape tool, and with the individual tool, I'm able to just decrease the surface area where it's a little bit more red and yellow, and I'm able to basically bring in that area. But what's really nice is when it comes to things like the incisal edge, it's almost better if you sometimes, thin out contact if it's, kind of touching a little bit too firmly with the opposing natural dentition, because what that's also going to help with is when you're printing in something like a resin, of course, it's not going to be able to have the incisal translucency that you're used to from traditional teeth. So having it a little bit thinner than obviously the neck of the tooth really does help the human eye to be tricked a little bit into thinking that it's a more natural tooth than it actually is, right? So you can actually get really beautiful aesthetics from your printed anterior teeth. So now what I'm doing is I'm holding my shift key and I've highlighted my 1-3, and then I now drop to my 2-3 on the left-hand side. So I've highlighted my anterior 6. And there's an option known as incisal variation. Now right now variation 1 is set to 0% for the strength, but watch what happens as I increase this strength. Okay, so again, when at 100%, that's obviously very aggressive. You wouldn't want to go necessarily that high. But when you go at about 40% or so and you hit apply, what it does is it adds a nice depth to the teeth. Now you might be saying to yourself, Michelle, that still seems a little bit too aggressive. But believe it or not, once you actually start polishing these teeth and finishing these, it's just the right amount, right? So I can add variation 3 now if I want. I can skip any of the ones that I want. As long as I hit apply, I'm applying as many or as little variations as I want. So variations 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all the same. They just go further up the neck of the tooth. And then variations 5 and 6 are kind of striations along the gum line. And again, they just change in terms of the thickness quality of it. But let's say I want to add a little bit of variation. Again, at 100%, very aggressive with the striations there. But if I lower it a little bit and hit apply, what it's doing is it's creating nice texture and surface area to the actual anterior teeth. So again, it just helps when I'm polishing these teeth that when it's finished at just the right amount. Okay. So the very next step, once you're happy with the position of the teeth, the length of the teeth, the shape of the teeth, that sort of thing, you're then able to move into the Edit Denture Base step, where it's of course going to propose a denture base for us. So based on our parameters that we set in the very first step here, it's going to add more or less kind of festooning and variation to the root variation. But of course I can go ahead and add more material if I want, or I can again even smooth out some of it if I felt that it was a little bit too much. So I'm just removing my upper jaw here, and I want to use the form tool and add around any edges where, maybe there was a little bit of blue for the thin spot. So I want to just add and bulk up that material so that I'm able to then smooth it and know that I'm not removing too much material to expose more minimal thickness. Now I'm just kind of smoothing those surface areas there without issue. All right. So I'm just adding material here using the smooth option, and again, just smoothing anywhere that I see fit. So once you're happy with the denture base step, okay, you're then able to move forward into the next step of the software. Now, when it comes to the editing of the denture base, let's say you wanted to, expose a little bit more of the tooth, round the embrasures a little bit. A lot of people will use things like the remove tool and maybe just make it a little bit smaller and kind of sculpt around. So and kind of imagine this is almost like your wax carver that you would traditionally use with wax and the Bunsen burners at the bench. You're now just doing it digitally. And then obviously you can add a little bit of material there and then smooth where you see fit. Okay, to again just soften up those embrasure spaces and things like that. So really easy to make beautiful denture bases. Very little work has to go into it because the software does majority of it, but it's always important to set the parameters based on your own standards. So when you come into the Edit Denture Base step, the Edit Denture Connector step, you might get a message sometimes that is suggesting that the denture base kind of gum goes over the connectors. Again, the connectors being in between the teeth that you have sectioned together. So if this message comes up, you can go back to edit denture base and kind of adjust those areas if you want, or you can hit continue. Again, it's the software's way of just being a stickler and kind of, acting as a kind of assistant to you to ensure that you know that there might be some of the pink gingiva kind of going over those connectors. But again, that's not too big of a deal because you're going to be bonding these teeth in anyways with something like HIPAA or a fuse material, so it's not too big of an issue here. So with the edit denture connector, basically the connectors between the teeth that are splinted together, you can edit them. So you can make them larger or smaller, or you can add material to them or remove material from them, depending on what you need. If any are in pink ever, that does mean they're a little bit light. So you would probably want to bulk those ones up. But if you see here, I can position the connector so I can move them physically. If I want to change the position of them, I can scale them to make them bigger or smaller. Okay, so again, if one was in pink and it was suggesting that it was a little bit too thin, I can scale it and bulk it up. I can also change the connector lines. So where the borders of the actual connector sit, I can change that. And then as well too, I can use the shape tool or the form tool to add more material or remove material should I need to. Now, sometimes people will say, wow, these connectors look a little bit too aggressive. They're really obvious. You'd actually be surprised. By the time you have your fuse or bond material kind of in between the tooth and the base, because those are usually the same shade as the actual denture base acrylic, it really does fill in those areas nicely, and you really don't notice that they're splinted together. So just keep in mind that when you're looking at it from this angle, you are looking at a denture almost 80 times the magnification sometimes. So those connectors can look far more aggressive than they actually are. So in the finalized stage, what's actually happening at this point in time is the software is generating sockets based on the design of our teeth, and it's actually creating now a neck to the tooth. Okay, so again, prior to this, the software has almost had these like kind of roots of the tooth, and you're maybe concerned, is this going to be what the tooth looks like? At this point in time, the software has now generated sockets instead, but you do have the option to do any final tweaks to the denture base or the teeth at this point in time with the form tool or the shape tool. Okay, so again, the tools are a little bit less, aggressive at this point in time because it just wants you to do minor tweaks. So if there's anything major that you wanted to do to the teeth, I would recommend the edit element step or the denture base step for anything, significant to the denture base itself. Okay, but you can always go back and change things if you need to prior to going to the export phase. But now in the export tab, this is where you are now able to export these files as either STLs to be able to go to a third-party printer or mill. As well too, you'll also be able to export to inLab CAM if you are milling in the MCX5. If you are not using the Dentsply to run a mill, there is no reason to export it to the inLab CAM because you would only need that if you were using our system. If you are using a third-party system, export to STL on the right-hand side is your best option. But here you'll see several, of your tooth segments that you can select and then export as needed. But I wanted to kind of point out here in the finalize step where you see that kind of faint line, that was the neck of the tooth that the software was generating in between the connector stage and the finalize stage. It was basically generating the necks of those teeth and connecting everything with those connectors. Okay, so that's kind of what it was doing at that point. But now you can see our denture base. We've got our sockets based on our teeth, and it's kind of created the depth according to the necks of the teeth. And that's why these kind of designs will work for pretty much all of your cases, right? Even if you have very limited vertical space, you'll be able to control the size of the teeth. So you'll have a lot more wiggle room to play with. And then now you'll see that I've got my try-in file here. So I'm able to, at step 1, export that as an STL for 3D printing to be able to, of course, have my patient come in now to be able to verify the bite, the aesthetics, and of course, the phonetics. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon on more videos.